Everyday people, extraordinary lives, journey through their stories, transform your mind. They're building enterprises and community, making a way for each other. That's the remedy. That's the remedy.
What happens to your mindset when your county is growing, but you're not sure that the growth includes you? Here in Chatham County, growth is bringing new buildings, new investment, and increased attention to communities like Siler City. But it's also prompting an important question. Who is this growth really for? Today, we're bringing these questions and many more to a Siler City commissioner. He'll share his perspective on how economic development shapes what entrepreneurs believe is possible, and how those beliefs can influence whether people feel welcome into the future that's being built around them. So grab your beverage of choice, settle in, and join us for this important conversation. Welcome to the Web Remedy Podcast. I'm your host, Renee Orr, the Executive Director of Web Squared, a nonprofit working to recognize and address the wealth gap by providing a supportive ecosystem for rural Black and BIPOC entrepreneurs in and around Chatham County, North Carolina. This conversation is part of our Money Mindset series, sponsored by PNC Bank. Today, we're looking at how local economic conditions and leadership influence entrepreneurial confidence, access, and what people believe is possible. Our guest today is Travis Patterson, who serves as a Siler City Town Commissioner. And you're also the mayor pro tem. Is that how you pronounce that?
Correct.
And you've spent your career helping out in workforce development. You are both a policymaker and a practitioner, and you help with economic growth in your community, policy decisions, and community investment. Tell us a little bit about your work, both as a commissioner and in workforce development.
Well, professional career has spanned over 20 years now. So I've hit the 20-year mark as a professional. And, to skip to where I am now, I never imagined that this is where I would be. My goal when I was in college and in school was to become a child therapist. I went to college at UNC Chapel Hill. I majored in psychology, a double majored in psychology and Spanish. I realized that the population here, I always wanted to work in Chatham County. I think I knew that much. My first real job was in child mental health, and I did that for about 5 years. And then there were some changes from the state. And since I hadn't finished my degree, it required me to change jobs. And so I wanted to continue working with young people. I secured a job in youth workforce development. And this was my first real exposure to what workforce development did and how it worked. And I stayed in that job for a couple of years. And then that was in Orange, Durham, some in Chatham County. But at the time, again, I was in Chapel Hill. I was living in that area, so I was serving that area. After that, I was offered a job in nonprofit, which at that time was a mentoring program. Accepted that job as a program assistant for a mentoring children of prisoners program. By the summer of 2011, that program did not exist anymore. And it was a brand new program at the time that I was hired. The federal government had some budget talks, I guess you could say. And once they finally agreed on that budget, that mentoring children of prisoners program funding had been rescinded. So I lost my job. I had to come up with some ways to make some income. I had a newborn child who came in August of 2011. So I was really trying to figure out, what I was going to do to be able to continue making money and providing for my newborn child. I started exploring entrepreneurship at that time. And, I'll come back to that in a little bit. But that was where I started as an unofficial service provider, I would say, because I didn't know anything about incorporating a business or, starting a business. I was just kind of out there trying to figure out how to make money. Shortly after that, I was rehired at the agency that lost the funding for the mentoring program and did a lot of programmatic work for them. I finished up the teen pregnancy prevention initiative. We got a contract to bring youth workforce development programming to Chatham County. And so this program was fairly fresh in terms of being established. And so I really had to pour into it and build it almost from the ground up. There were a few bricks laid, but I had to do a lot of building with this program. And so I had that contract for 3 years, and that is where I really learned about workforce development and became a program manager for a youth program in Chatham County. Did that for 3 years. After the third year, that contract found a new home. So I was once again unemployed. I went into domestic violence work back up to about 2006 or 2007, somewhere around there. I got involved in domestic violence work on a limited basis, a part-time employee for a visitation center in Chatham County. And I still work there today. So I've been there 20 years now, I think, back to 2015 when that third year contract ended in the workforce development youth program. I shifted full time to domestic violence work, coordinated a program for men and young men to really address the underlying causes of domestic violence, which, at that time, the idea was that males were 90% of the time the perpetrators of intimate partner violence. And how do we address that? And so we worked really hard to provide services out in the community to try to change the mindset of men around what masculinity is, and educating the community about intimate partner violence and those kinds of things. And then I shifted again and went into adult education, and I worked in adult education until 2021 when I returned back to my professional home where I started what is now Communities and Schools of Chatham County. And I started back in 21 as Community Service and Restitution Program Manager. So I worked closely with juvenile justice, back to my roots. And then at the end of that fiscal year in 2022, I accepted a role within the agency as a high school success coach to work in a local high school, providing services to young people, to high school age students. So that's kind of a summary of my professional career to date. Joined the Siler City Planning Board, I think, and served a term and a half. I served on the planning board for the town of Siler City before I was elected as an at-large commissioner for the town of Siler City in 2023. So I'm in my first term. I'm in my third year of my first term, and in my third year, I was elected by the board to serve as the mayor pro tem, in addition to my commissioner at large role. It's been quite an experience. I've learned a lot over the course of all these years. So excited to see how the intersection of all the skills and all the things are going to work as we move forward to try to shape and create opportunities for not just for Siler City, but for Chatham County as a whole.
Yeah, and that's a little bit about why we wanted to have you on. This is a money mindset series. It's sponsored by PNC Bank. I'm curious about your perspective on the intersections of growth and economic development and workforce development, and just on mindset and your particular perspectives as someone who's worked closely in this field, but also you're part of policy making and decision making in your community. So I just wanted to start by asking, how does economic growth, new business, infrastructure, investment, in fact, impact the residents you work with and how they see their own financial futures?
I think it's some inspiration. I think it could also be scary. I think Siler City is a small town, small area, it's a small community, big in personality. That can be both good and bad in some ways. But I think about how we as people can sometimes be inspired by what we see other people doing. If there's substance, if there's a lot of something happening, then exposure can be a great thing. It's inspiring. It opens your mind a little bit. It shows you that there are other ways to get things done, or, other ways to maybe think about how to approach and create solutions to barriers. On the flip side, I think if those things aren't there, then you have no exposure to it, and you don't know that those opportunities are there.
Do you feel there's any gentrification anxiety showing up in Siler City? Are people feeling that tension between what could be possible, but yet preserving what they have?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a challenge here as, again, the small town community that's, very comfortable right now. I think as we talk about growth, as we explore development, as large companies start showing interest in our area, I think we have to think about those things. And that does cause some people some anxiety. I think about, as you mentioned, gentrification. Back when we were getting excited about Wolf Speed, Wolfspeed is a large manufacturer that has a semiconductor plant here in Siler City, right on the outside of town. The hopes were high, and I don't want to say anything negative, but just thinking back to how it felt to be excited that there were going to be living wage jobs, right? I think at the time the entry level for Wolfspeed was maybe a little less than 80,000, I think. So what we saw happening was that in anticipation of those jobs and of people securing those jobs and wanting housing in the area, we saw a huge rent increase. The rent went up significantly just in a short period of time. And the thought behind that was that the median income of Siler City compared to what that entry level job was going to pay, that there was going to be a huge disparity in what people could afford considering the new rent rates. And so, there was a lot of anxiety around, particularly around our elderly population or our fixed income population, working population. By working population, I'm thinking about teachers, law enforcement, firefighters, kind of service provider jobs, right? That were in fear that they were no longer going to be able to live here because you couldn't afford the rent. I mean, if a teacher or a nonprofit worker makes, let's just say $40,000, that's half of what someone at Wolfspeed was potentially going to make. I think landowners or property owners were likely to go with the person who made the most money in order to rent to. And so there was a lot of anxiety around that at the time. And I think there's still anxiety around that, but I don't think we saw that develop the way that we anticipated that it was going to develop.
As a commissioner and a policymaker, do you see any kind of scarcity narrative happening in Siler City? Like, you have to leave to make it, or maybe this place isn't for people like me, or anything like that?
Absolutely. I was one of those people. When I graduated high school, I couldn't wait to get out of here. There was nothing to keep me here. There was no interesting jobs. There was very little shopping opportunities or recreation or leisure. So as a young person, I think the thing to do at that time was, you go somewhere where those things are so that, you can experience those things, right? I think we're still kind of in that place of having limited options and limited things to take advantage of. And it's hard to not consider that when we think about where we are as a town. And, if we want to change that, I think there has to be some conversation or exploration of what does growth look like. And growth is a scary word to a lot of people. It's scary to me too, because I'm from here. I grew up here. I left and came back. But when you think about growth, I think we think about knocking down trees. I think we think of more gray than green. I think we think about, buildings and large corporations and factories and things like that. And that may be some of it, but some of that may be necessary if we want to achieve the goals that we're setting to be able to hold on to our residents. So yeah, to answer the question, I think there is kind of the thought that if I want to be great, I have to go somewhere else. If I want to make a lot of money, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. If I want to have fun, if I want to be able to go shopping on, and within a 10-minute drive, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. I think that means at all that we don't have anything to offer here. I think it just depends on what you're looking for in a lifestyle. If you like the quiet, slow pace, hometown feel, then this is the place for you. If you like the big city, maybe it's not, but we're close enough that we're within driving distance of those places.
As a leader, how do you think it's the best approach of just signaling to residents, and especially entrepreneurs, that opportunity is accessible in Siler City?
I think word of mouth is one of the most powerful tools that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in order for people to be informed, that we're going to have to push the information out. And I think that means, leading by example or connecting by example. That's a new phrase I just thought about. But what that means to me is, I may not be an entrepreneur, but I have connections to entrepreneurs. And if you're interested in entrepreneurship, here are some opportunities. Here's an incubator program. Here are some organizations that can help you. Here are some examples for you to go talk to. Here are some opportunities for you to learn. And so I think, that's one way to do it. I also think back to leading by example that we kind of walk the talk, and that to me means that we are open to having conversations about how do we nurture, how do we cultivate an environment, how do we create a culture that welcomes and encourages and supports entrepreneurs, and also again informing the public that you know these opportunities are out here. Starting a business can be very intimidating. I think even thinking about it sometimes can be intimidating, but we have resources to help. And it doesn't have to be a scary process. I think there are a lot of people that have skills and have interest that if they wanted to go into business for themselves, they could. Maybe they just don't know how to start. Maybe they don't know how to continue. And I think, for me, just being a resource of resources and being able to get that information out, being accessible to people, being visible to people, you know, that can make or break a new business.
I think that there's probably an intersection between workforce development and entrepreneurship. They're kind of like, well, I'll just ask it this way. What is workforce development and what does it mean to be workforce ready?
To me, workforce development is how are we, what are we doing with our labor force, our workforce? How are we training and educating the people? And how are we aligning those skills and those people with the need of the labor market? And so, how are we developing our people to put them in position or prepare them for entry into the workforce? That to me is mostly what workforce development is. I think there's some other things that are involved in that, but I think that's the meat of it. I think, having conversations with employers, I think exploring the needs of the area. I think there's a lot of things around it, but in the center is the people. I think it's a people-based approach. I think that means we are intentionally working with our communities and our workforce to determine, if we have a gap in services in trades, let's just say plumbing, and we know that we don't have any plumbers. What are we doing to encourage, train, and educate people to be prepared to go into that field? And not just plumbing, but all the fields or all the gaps. So that to me is basically what workforce development is. And I think, if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper, it's not just training for plumbing, as we're using plumbing, as an example. I think it also involves a lot of soft skills and transferable skills training, human resources development. Are we teaching people conflict resolution? Are we teaching people time management skills? Are we teaching people communication skills? Because those things are important on any work site. And
But
so
skills are also accompanied by mindset. What are some of the mindset challenges you see as you work in this field of workplace development?
I think sometimes it's mind over matter. I think the biggest barrier is ourselves. I don't think there's anything that holds us back more than we hold ourselves back sometimes. And that could be, a person who's had a career job most of their adult life and now they don't and they want to go into entrepreneurship, but they for whatever reason feel that maybe they're past their prime, or do I have the skills, do I have the time? I know how hard it is. I've juggled several jobs for many years, and finding a balance between work and personal life can be difficult. But I think the biggest barrier is yourself. I think it requires dedication and open-mindedness. And I think it requires a mindset that says, I can do anything I put my mind to. If I apply myself, if I take it serious, and I approach it as if I really want to be successful, then I think you can find a way around anything, especially if we again are creating environments that welcome questions, that welcome support, and we say like, hey, you might be of a certain age. And it could be on either end of the spectrum. You could be 18 years old, fresh out of high school. You don't want to go to college. You don't want to enter the labor market. I want to start my own business. That happens too. And it can happen on the other end of the spectrum, at
So,
an age.
so if somebody comes to you and says, I'm really thinking of starting my own business, what's the first piece of advice you would give them?
That's a great question. I would tell them to prepare themselves. And I think that means a lot of different things for different people, right? I think, depending on the vision, it could mean late nights and early mornings. It could take you away from your family. Do you have a supportive network, your supportive home network that is going to support you? Have you explored this? Is there a need for this? I think there are a lot of different ways that conversation could happen, but I would first
Do
start
you
by, are you
do you
ready?
work to do you work to plug people into the small business ecosystem if they approach you and say, hey, there's these organizations, the Small Business Center, Web Squared,
Absolutely.
various organizations that are here that can help you get started or to think through your business plan?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that those are great starting places. I don't know if there's a designated flow chart for where to go. But I
Mhm.
think each of those stops are essential in figuring out, if this is a path that you want to embark on. And each has their own kind of specific offerings, right? We do have the Small Business Center at CCCC. We have Web Squared that helps, coach people through entrepreneurship. We have the Small Business Administration, which is kind of like a statewide resource. Yeah, and there are trends right now that show an increase in kind of a focus on workforce development or workforce training. There are trends right now that show an increase in entrepreneurship. I met with the Secretary of State. I didn't personally meet with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State visited us, and I attended kind of this very small workshop. And entrepreneurship is on the rise in North Carolina. I think more
Mhm.
people are exploring it. More people are wanting to go into business for themselves, and I think we're going to see a boom more so than what we've already seen just in entrepreneurship and hopefully in a more developed workforce that provides services that fill the gaps and the needs that we are seeing right now. So
Well,
I think it's on the rise.
yeah. So, Travis, this has been a great conversation, and I have so much more to talk to you. But before we continue, I must take a break to hear from our sponsor for this podcast series,
Sure.
PNC Bank.
As a bank, PNC prides itself on being boring. But the truth is, they couldn't be more excited to serve the dynamic Triangle community. They've quietly toiled away to deliver brilliant results for their equally brilliant clients. And they have dedicated PNC teams throughout the local area, all ready to do the boring work to help you unlock your own brilliance. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring.
PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC. Thank you, PNC Bank, for sponsoring our podcast. I'm back with Travis Patterson, and let's just switch gears and talk a little bit about community wealth and what that means to you from both workforce development counselor and your role as a commissioner. What does community wealth what does community wealth mean to you?
Community wealth to me means doing what's going to be best for the community. And I think a lot of times we think of wealth as financial wealth, but I see it a little bit differently. I think community wealth includes resources. I think community wealth includes, a network of support. I think community wealth includes knowledge and knowing what's out there, and it's less siloed and more of a shared wealth. That's what I think about when I think about community wealth. And as a commissioner, I think that means that the community knows that, when we are sitting at the table or we're on calls or we're having discussions as the policymakers and as the governing body of the town, that we are very considerate of, what's happening in our community. It's a- as an elected official, we are elected to represent the people. We're not there to necessarily give our own, to give our own input. It requires, I think, a broader approach and consideration of all the people.
What are some of the infrastructure investments or infrastructure needs that are needed in Siler City and Chatham County that matter most to small business owners? I mean, I think of broadband, childcare, transportation, housing.
I think all of those things, and in no list of prioritization, I would say transportation. Chatham County is huge, and we have to consider that if we're talking about building bridges from one part of the county to another part of the county, whether that's, creating your client base or accessing resources. Transportation is definitely a barrier. Housing is a barrier. We are experiencing some housing challenges right now that, we're thinking very creatively and strategically about how to address. I think the one that is probably the most common that we know and think about when we think about infrastructure is our, particularly Siler City, our water situation. We are currently under a moratorium from the state that prevents us from being able to create new sewer customers. If that makes sense, we can't add any new customers to our existing system until we make some upgrades.
Mhm.
And we are on track. And I think the timeline looks good for us. So I think things are going to look very different for us a year from now. And so, what that means is that for those small businesses that may want to have offices or may want to build office space or may want to occupy office space, I think we'll see more availability of those spaces in the near future here.
Mhm.
So, I think those three things are really big, the big three right now.
What's what's one policy or program that you've been working on that you're proud that directly supports entrepreneurs or workers in Siler City?
Really proud. I'm really proud that we Siler City last year were accepted into the Main Street program through NC Commerce. We are considered a downtown associate community, and then hopefully we'll graduate to an actual Main Street community. And if you're not familiar with that, Pittsboro is, I think, the closest Main Street community to us. It's not a financial program. It's more of a support program, and it does several things. But one of the things that it does focus on offering support for is business owners. Now, this is, I don't want to say limited, but focused on kind of downtown development. But downtown is usually the center of operations for a municipality. And I think if we are looking towards growth and we start downtown and we want to grow out, then this Main Street program could help not only develop our downtown, but also help us identify resources that could be financial resources through grants and other funding opportunities to help us support our entrepreneurs and our downtown businesses. So I'm really excited to see what the Main Street program is going to do for Siler City and what Siler City in turn is going to do for the community of Siler City, and hopefully, expand out throughout Chatham County and maybe be a catalyst for growth and entrepreneurship here.
What do you see as the balance, though, needed for growth between protecting long-term residents, long-time residents, but the need for bringing in new people and new businesses?
Yes, that balance is very important. You know, again, growth and development. I don't think there's any reasonable way to get where we want to be. And I think that's a conversation, that could be as inclusive as we want it to be in term because people's idea of where we want to be varies, right? Some people don't want to see as much change. Some people want to see a lot of change, and some people want to be in the middle. And I think about, again, as a collective of Siler City, I think that we need to be somewhere in the middle. I don't think it has to be we open the floodgates and develop everything, but I don't think we can not develop anything either. I think we have to find a happy medium. I think we have to, come to an agreement somewhere in the middle. And the way that we do that is with strategy and with consideration. And that takes hearing from the community members, that takes talking to business owners, that means gathering information from other sources to determine where that middle ground is. But i think there's I definitely think there's a middle ground that we need to meet on, but I think we need to be strategic about it. I think we need to be smart about it. I think we need to consider the community's thoughts about it.
How can entrepreneurs engage with you and other members of the local government to advocate for what they need?
I can't speak for anybody else, but I am always accessible. As a public official, my information is public. My address is on the website, my phone number is on the website, my email's on the website. I am out in the community as my day job is a community worker. Honestly, it's more than a job. My life is community work. So, I like to think that I'm very easily accessible. I like to think that I am very open-minded, and I like to hear from the community. That's one of my favorite parts of the job, of all the jobs, is working with the people to create solutions, right? But outside of that, that's how you can find me. I'm everywhere. I'm not hard to find. I'm on Facebook. I'm on everything. But from a commissioner's perspective, we meet, the town of Siler City Board of Commissioners meets once a month on the first Monday of every month regularly, unless there is a special reason why we can't meet. For example, September, the first Monday is close to Labor Day, so we have moved that meeting to the middle of September, I think the third Monday. But we have on our agenda what's called public comment. And this allows for the public to come to the board meetings and talk about whatever they want to talk about for 3 minutes. That's an opportunity where if business owners wanted to, advocate for something, they can have 3 minutes to do so individually. If, 10 people come, each person that signs up can have 3 minutes. So that's 30 minutes of advocacy for whatever they may want. Our town staff are typically available to the public. I would encourage a phone call or an email just to check in and maybe schedule an appointment, as they are busy. So I want to be respectful about saying about their availability. And we welcome all comments. We welcome community members to come and speak. I always encourage people to come to the meetings. If you can't come to the meetings, we offer a virtual option. So if you can't be there in person, you can join us on Zoom. If you can't join us in person, if you can't join the Zoom at the time of the meeting, those recordings go to YouTube. And so you can watch them later. And so, all those things can keep community members and residents well informed about what's happening in the town. And if there's something that happens during those meetings that needs to be discussed, then, we are available for that.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. I will put some of your contact information in the show notes so people listening know how to get in touch with you.
Okay.
I just have one last question, Travis.
Yeah.
What's your vision for Siler City in the next 5 to 10 years, economically, or maybe just in terms of opportunity for small business?
Great question. I've talked a little bit about it. I think for me, I would like to see I say us, and I mean Siler City, maintain the feeling that we have, the community feel. That's really important to me, and one of the biggest reasons why I came back after school. It certainly wasn't to go shopping or, there was not to go to
Mhm.
McDonald's. But what brought me back was a sense of community. It's a very integrated, very meshed community here, where people still wave at you, even if they don't know you sometimes. You're crossing the street and people may throw up a hand, or you drive by someone's house and they're on the porch and they may wave. I think that makes me feel really warm inside. And I love that feeling. And I want to project that out, in my roles. And so that sense of community is something that I would love to hold on to. I love being able to drive 2 miles outside of the city limits and see trees and sometimes cows and agriculture and, enjoy the Rocky River, or, you drive up, 20 miles up the road, or then you see the Haw River, or, like those the natural essence of this area is really special. And I want to hold on to that, but I also want to be able to think realistically about growth, and it might mean a compromise. Hopefully, that's a healthy compromise, and we are making very thoughtful and well-informed decisions about how that growth happens, and not just allowing anyone to come here and set up shop or knock down the trees or pollute the water sources or anything like that. And I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying I wouldn't want to see that kind of compromise for growth. And so, that's in a nutshell what my vision is. Some middle ground of maintaining what we have, but also giving a little bit so that we can create opportunities to keep our residents, because ultimately, our residents is what makes this place special, and it's going to be what makes this place thrive, right? So we need people to live here. We need you to own your home here. We need you to send your kids to school here. We need that for the community. And if we don't, if we aren't able to offer those things, then we're not going to be able to hold on to our people or attract new people. And so, just thinking about that in terms of opportunity, we need jobs, we need housing, we need development. We need new restaurants sometimes. I get so many questions. We're getting a cookout. I don't think that's a secret anymore. It's everybody knows it. And outside of, what's going on with the water, where can I find a house, or, put me onto some resources, it's when is cookout going to open? Because they want something new to eat, right?
Well,
Um,
it has good ice cream.
they have some of the best milkshakes, right? And
Yeah.
likewise, I always tell people, I say, well, in order for companies to want to come here, we have to attract them here.
Hmm.
And we do that through, showing them what our culture is all about. So I'm very proud of Siler City and of Chatham County, and I love it here, and I want other people to love it too.
Well, thank you, Travis, for your time. I know you're a busy person getting back to school. You have a lot of things going on. Is there anything you want to leave with the listeners who might be tuning in to the podcast conversation?
Probably a lot, but for in the interest of time, I just want to say that there are still people here who care, and make sure that those people are connected. Make sure that you know where those people are, and know that those people are willing to help you, whether it's with entrepreneurship, whether it's, getting your kids school supplies, whether it's helping you stay informed of what's going on in town. You know, these are the things that really matter. I think sadly our country is very divided right now, and it's hurtful to watch sometimes. But there's joy in fellowship, and together we can do anything we need to do. So just, find out what's important to you and commit to it.
Oh, yes. On that note, yes, I 100% agree. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Rennie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Web Remedy Podcast. If our conversation helped you see how local economic growth and public policy shape what's possible for you and your business, share it with another entrepreneur in your community. And remember, your voice matters in shaping what comes next, because our evolution begins with dialogue. Thank you for listening to the Web Remedy Podcast, a mindset shifting project of Web Squared. Wealth Through Entrepreneurship for Black and Brown Businesses is a North Carolina nonprofit located in Chatham County. We offer incubator accelerator business services to Black, BIPOC, and rural entrepreneurs. Our podcast producer and editor is Rennie Orr, the executive director of Web Squared. Our music is by Deja Bell and Maddie McGaskill. Our podcast studio is located at the 79 West Innovation Hub in Pittsboro, North Carolina. We realize that building an ecosystem of support is critical to achieving our mission. Your donation supports Web Squared's coaching services, the promotion of the businesses and entrepreneurs we serve, and of course the podcast. To learn more, please visit our website at websquared.org.
Everyday people, extraordinary lives, journey through their stories, transform your mind. They're building enterprises and community, making a way for each other.